Hello and welcome back. So let's get started with the ERD for our My Recipes app. So I'm going to navigate over to My Recipes app. Okay, and let me pull up the entity relationship diagram. Okay, so this is the one that I have right now for the application. We're going to have recipes. And recipes are going to have name and description. So you're going to have a name for the recipe or what type of recipe, and then a description of the recipe with how to go ahead and build a dish that you have, okay? And it's also going to have a chef ID. Now, what is chef ID? The users for the application, we're going to call chefs. It's pretty fitting because we're going to have people build recipes, so might as well call them chefs, right? So chefs are going to have name and email. And there's going to be another field here, another attribute, which is going to be password digest. But we're not going to deal with that right now because it's not necessary right now. But basically, it's going to be name and email. And this is enough information at this time to go start building these models. So let's start with recipe. I'm going to create a migration. So Rails, generate migration, create recipes. Okay, it invoked Active Record, went ahead and created this migration file. So let's take a look. I'm going to close To-Do app. There's my recipes, db, migrate. There we go. There's a migration file. So let's take a look at the diagram again. Recipes are going to have name, description, and right now I'll leave chef ID out of it, okay? Chef ID will be necessary when I'm creating the one-to-many association with chefs. I'll add that later. Right now, let's just add name and description, and you know that ID will be added by Rails. So I'm going to go with t.string name, okay? It's going to be string, and t.string email, all right? Save that. Now, over here, I have a second diagram. If you want to look at it, this is the model view, okay, or the schema view of the table. So recipes, I'm going to have ID that's type integer, name, type string, description, type text, user ID, integer, created at, updated at. Now, created at and updated at I've left out so far. So let's go ahead and add these. I can add them. Now, these are special fields, okay? Rails tracks them automatically as long as you have the names as created at and updated at. That's if you add them manually. But there's a way to add them automatically. You can simply say t.timestamps, okay? Timestamps are going to go and add created at and updated at to your table. So let's go ahead and run this. So Rails db :migrate. There you go, migrating, and table has been created. Now, if I try to access this from the Rails console, it's not going to work because I don't have the model yet. So let's go ahead and add the model. All right. So under my app folder, models, right click, new file, and by convention, since it's recipes table, it's going to be recipe singular recipe.rb. Okay, and class recipe subclass from application record. Okay, so I have a model and I have the table, so let's try to connect it from the Rails console. All right, let me expand this, then Control L to go on top. Okay, so let's start with recipe.all to test the connection. There you go. And then if I simply type in recipe, the class name, there's ID, type integer, Rails assigned, name, type string, email, type string, created at, date time, updated at date time. Perfect. So it's working. I'm going to exit out of console. All right, so now let's go ahead and do the same for user. There you go, user, name string, email string, password digest string. Now, password digest also is something I'm not going to add right now. I'm going to leave it for later once we work on authentication. Right now, I'm just going to do name, email, created at, and updated at. So let's do that. Rails generate migration, create chefs. Okay, I'm going to call the table chefs. All right, and there you go. Create chefs, t dot string name, t dot string email. Actually, for name, I'm going to say chef name. Okay, t dot string email, and then t dot timestamps. Save that. Rails DB migrate to impact the database. Okay, so the table is created, chefs table. Now, if I go to my models, right click, new file, chef.rb, lowercase c, chef, singular, .rb, class chef, subclass from application record. All right, so let's test it out, Rails console. All right, chef.all, chef, perfect. There's ID, chef name, email, created at, updated at. Great. I'm going to exit out. Now the next step is we are going to add validations to chef and to recipe. And we're going to do that. We're going to build this functionality by using test-driven development. Okay. So what am I talking about? Test-driven development. By using that, it's going to allow us to basically work out the requirements by thinking of the tests that we're going to be writing. It's going to clarify for us what we need to be using to build chef and recipe, basically to make it solid, right? So we don't have errors. So let's go ahead and do that. In the README, I'm going to start writing the requirements for recipe and then chef. Okay, so recipe, let's start. First, recipe should be valid, right? So recipe should be valid, meaning anytime I work with an object, recipe object, it should be a valid object that's hitting the database. All right, then recipe should have a name. Name should be present. Then description should be present. If these are not present, then the recipe is not going to be correct and it won't hit the database. Okay, so right here, the name and description should be present. Chef ID should be present because any recipe should be built by chefs. There can be recipes without a chef associated with it. So we're gonna go with chef ID should be present. Now for this one, we're gonna build later, because initially we're simply going to build the recipe without chef ID necessary. Then what else? We should have limitations on name and description, right? About what the maximum length should be for name, what the maximum length should be for description. So maximum length for name and description. Okay? Maybe a minimum also. Maybe a minimum for description. Because you don't want irrelevant data in your application. What else? I think that pretty much covers recipe. Okay, and then let's start with chef. If there's anything new that comes up, we can always add it. But now I think that's enough to get started. So if we write tests for these, then we can be fairly confident that if the tests pass and we build the functionality for validations to make these tests pass, that we'll have a pretty solid recipe model. So for chef, same thing, chef name should be present. Okay, email should be present. Then size restrictions on email and chef name, right? Maximum and minimum. Email address should be valid format. Okay, you can't have random email address formats that are not valid. So we're going to test for that. Then email should be unique, because we're going to be using email for logging users in. You want email to always be unique and case insensitive. And I think that's it. I think that's enough to get started. So we have these requirements for recipe and chef, and that's all I'm going to cover in this video. In the next video, we're going to start with building the tests for recipe and then build out the recipe model. And then we'll build the test for chef, build out the chef model, and work on the associations. All right, see you there.